Hi, host Eric here with host Zachary, with fanperson JC, with fanperson Hami, with fanperson Frenzy, and we are talking about the notion of what you don't have to worry about as an understanding of introversion and extroversion of functions. So I talked about it in an earlier video, but I'm going to recap real quick here so we can get the conversation started. Simply, it says this, that if you have introverted feeling, it's basically saying, I don't need to worry about their feelings. I got to be concerned with my own feelings. Oh, they'll be fine. They can take care of themselves. If you're extroverted feeling, you're thinking to yourself, I'm not fussy. I don't need to worry about my feelings. I'm going to be fine. I'm just concerned if they're all cool and they're all happy, then I'll be fine. So I don't have to worry about them. So, and then on the TITE, it's I don't need to worry about their understanding. What they need to do, since they're the one coming and presenting things to me, is they need to make sure their things they're presenting are consistent with my understanding, or I'm not going to agree with them. I'm going to say they're wrong, and I'm going to oppose it. TE says, I'm not worried about my own thinking, my own understanding of things. I'm worried about making sure they understand and that I account for their understandings. So TE will be like, okay, well, I know I can't make this part of the TE thing because Eric's going to flip out if it has any kind of rights violation or constriction on people or any kind of rule at all, basically. So I'm going to leave that one out. That's a TE sort of thinking that's concerning itself with my understanding, not with my understanding as an element that it has to consider in making something efficient. And then SISE, it's like, I'm not concerned about those objects out here. I'm concerned about this object right here. That's SI. And then the flip side with it would be, I'm not concerned about this object right here. It'll take care of itself. I'm concerned about those objects out there. That's SE. And then N doesn't really work yet. We're trying to make it work.
Mm, I don't think that. I think that the introverted functions are internal frameworks of that particular subject. So, like regarding like T and TI, it's not that TE isn't aware of how they're going to perceive things that deal with logical data. I think it's they're more inclined to take objective data, or not even necessarily data, but anything that's like I think with TE is specifically, I think we're prone to think that it's mostly to do with external facts, but it can be ideas as well. I mean, a lot of TE
No, sure.
users, yeah,
Sure.
they pick up like traditions and stuff like that, or
But
like an external structure.
but my point is that it's what they're worried about, right? That's the key element. What are they worried about? They're worried about making sure their thinking works with other people's thinking. In other words, that it accounts for other people's understandings of things. The model has to, any sort of protocol has to account for other people's schedules, other people's opinions about how things ought to be set up, other people's, the existing models that exist in the world that are approaches to dealing with things. All of that
I think that's
stuff.
an FE thing. I think TE would be more about efficiency, not really focusing on how other people perceive it, but rather what's the most efficient way of
But
implementing it.
but it is
Yeah, I
not
agree with that.
but it is not conceivable to so but here's the thing. Hami would then say, if I point out counterexamples like, well, but Hami, you wouldn't intentionally make a protocol that you know is going to receive more pushback from everybody if you could come up with a protocol that would receive less pushback because you're ultimately concerned with the efficiency of the whole thing, right?
Uh,
It would
no,
depend
I
on
would say
what's
that
more
I
efficient.
would, I would say like I'm just more concerned about just stating the facts and making sure that my argument is flawless. I'm not really concerned about other people's understanding
But let's say you're
of
not
what I'm
making
talking
an
about.
argument, though, Hami. Let's say you're not making an argument. Let's say, for example, that you are making protocols. Well, for example, this. I had a big argument with my new partner because she's trying to charge my kids what I consider to be too much money, given that we had to change the schedule and reduce the number of total hours the kids are getting. And my position is that it doesn't matter if that's what we charge in general. This is a different circumstance. We need to alter things to make it more fair. because everything has to conform with my internal understanding of things. Whereas I believe that an average TE user would question, okay, well, did you go through all these following protocols to ensure that they're okay with it? Did you make any accounts whether they're okay with it? Are you sure they're okay with it? And you might check to see if they are in fact okay with it. That's not because you're passionately obsessed with other people's feelings, but because that's the issue at hand. And most issues at hand are issues just like that, where you're talking about other people's perceptions and reactions of things are going to be relevant.
Yeah, I would agree with that somewhat.
So, I mean, my position is it doesn't matter if you've met whatever protocols you met, because I don't like it, because it's fundamentally not fair for these reasons that you're not going to answer, because you're going to reference all these protocols that you did meet. I don't care about the ones you did meet. I only care about the one you didn't meet.
Yeah, I would agree, but I wouldn't say that's a primary concern of TE users.
You mean other people's reactions?
I mean that comes as secondary. I would say
Right. I think
not a primary
it's
concern.
framed. I think it's framed through efficiency. It's the matter that you have that is part of the equation when you're coming up with efficiency. I don't think it's done for its own sake. But when I say other people understanding, when you just said you want to make sure you state things clearly and you state only the facts, that's because you're concerned about other people's understanding. Not necessarily you want to make sure they understand because you're such a good person, but you don't want to.
You're going to be concise in your implementation of your ideas.
Yeah, like I don't want to come off as like incompetent either.
I think it's
And
interesting. You think
I want them to
non-factual.
know.
Go ahead.
Like I want them to know that I understand like what I'm talking about as well.
But you indicated you like to present just the facts, sort of a thing, right?
Yeah,
See, I would argue, and I think most NTPs would agree that there's no superiority to issues to stuff that's being discussed only with facts versus stuff that's being discussed with some things like conditionals, potentialities, and or other mushy stuff. Right? Like I think most NTPs would embrace a certain amount of mushiness as necessary in a rhetorical exchange. INTPs less, but I don't know. I think we're a little more comfortable with mushiness.
Give me an example of mushiness.
Well, for example, if we were only going to quote unquote state the facts, I guess what the mushiness would be is in a willingness to indulge in some non-rational mechanisms, provided they're framed within a rational framework. A lot of ENTPs are kind of superstitious. I don't know about INTPs.
It depends.
I would say like INTJs or NI users in general too are kind of superstitious. But I would say like for INTJs they probably try to push that down as much as possible.
I think N makes you superstitious. My experience makes me sort of magic believing is this phenomena I've had many times where things are happening that I don't understand, and then they'll reach a certain juncture point, and I'll feel as though, oh, that's why I did those things back there, was to make these points that now will link together and make this picture that I didn't realize I was doing that. Well, how could I have been doing something like that, setting up plot points to make a picture without knowing what I was doing? Unless I mean, it could be a Texas sharpshooter thing where I'm going after the fact and finding a picture out of a myriad amount of dots. But even then, it often seems to fit together in remarkably implausible ways.
I feel like I feel like the universe has a certain deterministic will to it, and when my own individual will aligns with it, I think that's when I get the sense of like elation or like on the right path, so to speak. That's my experience. That's what I would garner as like the sort of magical thinking result.
Are you sure you didn't experience that elation because you were accidentally in a quadruple?
Um, no, because I don't necessarily need to be around people. It's just like I don't know. Sometimes it feels as if it's that feeling of things falling into their place. You know, that's the feeling.
The other feeling that I often have is that, as is necessitated by what you're saying, is that there are arcs of events that are linked together that move on an arc that have a beginning of a storyline, so to speak, in your life and a clear ending point in your life. And that those events and people and happenings and stuff move together in coordination with other stuff that's unseen in ways that that make that make weirdly composite kind of, I don't know. It, it's hard to explain it, I guess, or it's hard to
I
understand it.
understand completely what you're saying. Like, and I think the last time we both experienced that was with the hotel rooms. I think that was like the. I mean, there was a lot of things that day that happened that only happened because I missed my flight.
Right.
And it's like, I think we both even experienced that same sense of like, everything kind of fell into the place that it should have been in anyways,
Right.
but only because it was like a mistake of what we previously were approaching it from. But it was sort of like
It
I don't know.
it's as
It's
though
weird.
it's as though these you had a bunch of things that wanted to happen in the universe, okay? That the universe that somehow wanted to happen. And you had a couple other things that were contradictory that also sort of wanted to happen. And as like maybe one or two of those things fall away, then the one that sort of wants to happen is up against a lot of resistance. And the one that sort of wants to happen is you make your flight on time. But the other things that want to happen or want to happen later, but they're contingent on you not being there at a certain time. So somehow that causes you, or just shit happens that you miss your flight. It seems so magical.
It does, yeah. It's very strange. Like I totally get. I'm not sure if anyone else listening is understanding what we're talking about because we are the ones that experienced the hotel thing. But I I totally understand. Like I get that feeling a lot of the dots connecting and the sort of I feel like there are multiple. The way I rationalize it is that I feel like the deterministic universe has a path set out that changes depending on certain vectors of an individual path. Uh, but that's very vague. It doesn't really give a clear conception of what it is. But that's sort of the experience that manifests for me. You know.
What do you mean by Dickensian coincidences? Is that in reference to Dickens or is it something else? Okay, yeah. Uh, but of course, the other way to look at it is it's not really possible to not have such stories, one way or the other. That if it's not, if it doesn't happen one way, it happens the other, and then that seems just as necessarily true as the first, except it doesn't, right? Like I can tell when like I've tried to force something and I'm making it go because I'm keep pushing on it, but it doesn't want to go there. It just doesn't want to, right? To a certain extent, with Abraham, I have that phenomenon where I was trying to put him in a position, in the wrong position, basically. He's he's got a lot of talents, but he's not an ENTJ. He's not an ESFJ. He's an ENFJ, which makes him not necessarily the most orderly person in the world, or at least not maybe not perfectly suited for all the administrative work. Not that he's doing a bad job with it or anything. It just makes me understand. And it's not that my response to it is to modify his work so that he's doing stuff that's more in line with what he does. You know.
I think that the difference between NI and NA, NI is awareness of. I feel like NE is more focused on conceptions that exist externally. NI is going to get an internal idea of certain phenomena, and because they have SE, they're going to be able to notice that in the outside world. But NE originates in the external world and never comes back to the subject. So it's only rationalized internally, whereas NI completely perceives the possibilities and intuitions internally.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I would also say that like for me, it manifests in the opposite way. I would say, like where I'll be doing something wrong for a while, and then it just pops in my head, oh, this is how you do it, and I figure out in that instant how to do everything, and then I proceed.
Hmm.
I have a lot of experiences like that too, where I abruptly realize, oh, I'm doing this stupid. That
Yeah,
happens fairly often to me. But
You get the feeling that like you don't understand how you didn't understand it before.
yeah,
I get that a lot too.
well, it's just because there's a learning curve. It's as I said on a video last night. I think only a few days ago did I learn you could loop YouTube videos.
You can loop YouTube videos.
See, right click on the title right after you start the video, and a drop down menu will appear with loop as an option.
I know one little trick of YouTube videos. You know when it's like loading, there's the little dots that are like going around in a circle. If you click on it and then press the arrow keys, you can play Snake.
Really, that's a
yeah. I
neat
knew
trick.
that.
That's a
It
neat
was a
trick.
complete accident that I found it. Yeah, it was years ago. But yeah.
Who are we getting all that background talking from?
Tommy.
Sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay. Okay, so I think this idea works well for the judging functions. That it's a matter of what'll take care of itself, your feelings or theirs, your understanding or theirs. The extrovert thinker, they think their own thinking will take care of itself, their own understanding will take care of itself. They're worried about making sure that others understand, and vice versa for the TI people. I think that there's a problem with TE and FE being this constant sort of that's not
Authoritarian.
TE, that's FE. Well, that's not FE, that's TE, or something like that. I think there's a big mistake there in making that and thinking that that's confusing, because to me FE is the thing that decides, like, we need a rule, or we need, well, anytime you got somebody going, we need to do this, that involves a lot of FE. Whether it's FE's not working alone, it's FE in conjunction with something. When the actual rule is made, that's people who are TE people trying to come up with an effective protocol to make this rule. But the fact is, how that rule is enforced and whether or not it works and stuff, and whether or not it's adjusted, is often in the hands of the FE people. And so TE may have a collaborative process with FE in which it's not a willing participant. It's trying to solve a problem, and FE takes the power of its algorithms and directs it towards other ends.
Yeah, I would also say too that TE and FE are authoritarian functions, and I would say TI and FI are more libertarian and individualistic.
I'd agree with that.
Because TE and FE are always trying to force their will onto other people, or their way of thinking
Well, see,
onto others.
I think that Mega Bro would object to that and say that's not pure TE. That's bad TE. I also make a distinction today between good and bad of each of those. For TE, I say the bad kind of TE is standardization. The good kind of TE is solvency. The good kind of TE is a ideally a protocol that needs to be executed, and when it's executed, it achieves a complete result of solvency of some
Why do you
sort.
view standardization as so pejoratively?
Well, because it standardization implies that definitionally it's not the best for it's not any individual's first choice, but it's what you get.
It's
And
more efficient, I would say.
but my problem is the notion that who are you giving me something and or demanding things of me in the first place? And if you are going to, and you want me to take you seriously, you better account for my position on the matter.
Hmm.
Yeah, but the thing is though, if you're running a society, there needs to be standardization at some point.
I agree.
You just can't have people like running around and doing whatever they want
If
and doing what
okay,
they please.
if we're beginning sentences with if you're running a society, you're running a society means some guy is executing rule justified coercion against some other guy.
No, it doesn't.
Of course it does.
I mean, I would say it's technically coercion, but
The thing about
I would say that
the
justify what
coercion
it
thing
means.
is ridiculous because a society is not by nature authoritarian. It's only authoritarian if you view the pacts by which the citizens give each other as having a coercive nature, which is going to have anyways. Like, force is going to exist regardless of which pact inherits that. An authoritarian pact would, like, as the government, just encompasses all the pacts between the individual citizens.
My point is the verb running. Okay? If somebody positions their own duty as a governor of some sort as running society, or if we start to afford these individual people the notion that that's what they're doing, running society, we got a really big fucking problem. That's centralization as well as standardization.
I
Society
was
needs to run itself on smaller little groups, right? There's no reason for a group way over there to run my society. Why don't my
yeah.
city run its own society?
When I said you, I was actually talking about like the government. I was
I
implying the
know.
government or like a group of individuals.
I know. I'm saying that metaphor is part of the problem. Where we are assuming that there's this thing that exists called the government, whose job it is to run society. But my position is that's the problem. We don't need to run society. We need to protect individuals from rights violations, and we need to, there may be some we stuff that needs to be done, but by and large, if anybody, there's no such thing as running society except through presuming that you can tell other people what to do.
Wait, so you have faith in people to make the right decisions and
No, I say
on their own
if
minds?
you're not running society if you're responding in a just fashion to a rights violation. You're doing your job as a public servant. That's different.
Yeah, I'm
Right.
saying the fundamental question is like I would say is whether you trust like individuals to make the right choices for themselves.
Well, I mean, I do by and large. I also understand that some individuals will make poor choices that impact others in ways that are criminal. I understand that the government needs to deal with that. I agree with all that. But my position is 95% of it, of running society, doesn't conform to those limits. So running society basically just means I am going to use my more power to force people through mechanisms detached from myself to do things I don't really care about. Because that's what we
That sounds
do
like
up here.
I don't know, for some reason like these past 2 weeks I've been questioning my libertarian principles,
Good.
and I've been considering
I
like
agree.
no, I've
Good.
been considering whether authoritarianism is actually the right way. Because
Well,
like me personally, like I don't trust people. I don't trust citizens to like. I understand people have rights, and I understand that like morally, but at the same time, I still don't trust individuals in the society to make the correct decisions for themselves.
oh, but
And I
you
feel like
do. You do if you trust individuals to make the correct decisions for others, right? Because you're
Yeah,
just
but I
saying
was saying
some
those.
individuals can't, but the people can the people who make decisions for us, can they make decisions for themselves, or do we get to make decisions for them?
I think those people are qualified
By what?
to make decisions for themselves. Like I would
Well,
say,
in our
generally,
society, democratically, supposedly.
yeah, and those people that get to the top are usually, I would say, the most intelligent of them.
So your position is because they attained power that they're capable of making decisions for themselves and others, and those who have not attained power are not capable of making decisions for themselves or others.
Yeah, but I would say, also say that most of those people don't really care if people are making decisions for them anyway. The average
Yeah,
person.
that's true.
So you're saying they're not a victim if they don't object to it.
They don't care either
Yeah,
way.
that's exactly what we're. Yeah, I mean that's the whole libertarian idea.
That's the reason. That's also the reason why I think
That's
libertarianism is never
fine.
gonna.
Hey, listen, I'm not objecting to that, right? I am not objecting to any citizen in this United States following whatever laws they want to follow, paying whatever taxes they want to pay. Now, which person is qualified to force it to take it from me by force? Who's qualified?
I
Who
would say the
quali-
person that's democratically elected by the society
is
I
qualified
mean, it's
to?
that
not,
you
it's
live
not
in.
a person; it's the mechanism of the government.
Okay, well then, is the
We're going
mechanism
much by the
qualified?
government.
What legitimizes the mechanism? What's your limiting principle?
Well, because there needs to be some sort of centralized authority to overlook the pacts between individuals.
Okay, again, you're first of all that's begging the question. You're assuming that we need this thing that we're arguing about whether we need it or not.
You're
But
arguing that we have individual rights that ought not to be violated,
right,
but you have to have a fucking governmental system to even actualize those rights.
no, you have to have a government system to protect those rights. I've never objected to that government system. I'm saying we need to constrain it to its rightful place as a rights protector.
Okay.
So obviously we are going to have government. What I am responding to now is the absurd notion that Hami floated that somehow authoritarianism might be better. Because, as always, we tend to forget the fact that when we talk about systems of government, we talk about them being executed by individual human beings. Now, to the extent that the system has anything to make us feel good about it, it's that it tends to preclude single human beings from gathering too much power in the status quo in our system. And that's a good thing. However, as a consequence, the flip side of that is what ends up happening is the democratic morass, which is what happens when a democracy lasts on for a certain amount of time. Laws are always added, but they're never removed. So that's why we've got, if you would like to pay your totally just and reasonable taxes to the government, all you got to do is read 11,000 pages of federal tax code.
Now, I agree with that. I think that's too ridiculous. I think the taxation should be a lot more simpler, and I think we should be aware of what the funds are going to exactly and how much.
Yeah,
I agree with your idea that taxation, at the least, should be decentralized to states. Like, I think the states. I like your idea that the state should be required to take taxation from its citizens, and then it's required to pay a certain amount to the federal government for certain mechanisms by which only the federal government should be allowed to do, and remaining powers or whatever. And I think the taxation, whatever the taxation should go into with the geographic areas, the sovereign states, should be up to the people. Like if they pay taxes, they should decide if it goes into any social programs at all.
And listen,
that's
I
basically
am
the U.S.
not.
government right now.
Say again. Say. Go ahead, Hami.
That's basically the U.S. government in a nutshell.
No, it's not. The U.S. government has uh, over almost $18 trillion in debt.
No, I'm saying, like through the eyes of the founding fathers,
Oh, that's what it should
like
be. Yeah,
yeah, where,
that's
where
what
the
it should
states have their own rights, and then that goes to the federal government.
be. And here's the thing: I am not such a rights fanatic that I think rights need to be prioritized over everything in the world. For example, I am not opposed to a certain amount of zoning legislation at the local level that says no, you can't build your factory next to my house. I think that's reasonable. I think communities should have a reasonable amount of control over how changes to their community come into being. So yeah, you might buy a house here. That doesn't mean you can decide to turn it into a house of prostitution right next to all of our houses and the schools and be open 24 hours a day. And it's not that what you're doing is so horrible. It's just that's not what we want. That's not what we bought into when we bought into this neighborhood. So I understand that local laws like that are going to violate your property rights a little bit. They're going to infringe on. They're not going to violate them necessarily. They're going to say, if you're buying here in this community, these are the standards that we adhere to in general, and there are limits on that. It's a little bit of a mushy area, but the point is, when it's local, then there's accountability. When it's
Yeah,
centralized,
I
and
think yeah,
then we
I
have
think that
problems.
definitely like the. I agree with that. Yeah, I think it the focus on uh, perhaps institutions within communities should definitely be a community problem as opposed to like a federal problem. I agree with that completely.
Yeah, like I agree with it on principle, but do you think the average person actually like cares or is gonna pay any attention to what the local government's doing?
Well, if
Of course they do.
if the community has a whorehouse come up beside their school in their community, I'm sure they're going to vocalize complaints about it.
Where
Yeah,
the
but I'm talking.
government, the local government gets all of its money from property taxes. It's a like my city has about 25,000 people in it, right? And there's a city board and a mayor, city hall, that kind of stuff. Maybe it's got 30,000 people. I don't know, but I can walk right in there and talk to them anytime I want, and I have had to go and talk to them before. I know that the problem is fine.
I
The
don't even
government.
know who my governor or not my governor, my mayor is. Is it bad?
No, no. I mean, you don't have any. Your city probably. That's the thing. You don't have a lot of fights with your city usually. You don't have complaints. You don't hear me complaining about Temple City laws.
That's true. But I think I, I think the whole I think the answer to social programs is if there's going to be social programs, it needs to be localized and it needs to be a democratic consensus. I think that's the best way to address social programs.
Like direct democracy.
Say again?
Direct democracy.
Mm,
I'm just talking about through the local government, not through the state.
oh, I guess for local communities, yeah.
Well, here's the thing. I think that local communities should not. Well, I mean, I think their core duty is to spend the property taxes on whatever they got to spend it on. City beautification, parks, whatever, shit like that. Schools. If you want to have schools, if you want to have public schools, I don't think it's a good idea, but whatever. The point is, when I hear both of you guys saying you're questioning your libertarian beliefs, I like to hear that. I think it's important that you hammer on them as hard as you can. Because what you end up finding as you explore the ideas a little bit more carefully is at the end of the day, no matter how much you want to afford significance to this fiction of a set of independent rules making moral agents decisions, which is what we're trying to say when we're trying to divorce it from the individual people doing it in government. We're saying there is no moral agency happening here. The rules have the moral agency, and that's not possible. That's my fundamental contention is that government is a fiction intended to remove from individuals their moral agency. When a legislator passes a law, I think that any legislator passes a law that requires coercion in the absence of rights violation should need to go apply the coercion himself. Because my position is this: if I saw somebody beating up somebody else, I absolutely would feel justified in intervening, and I would feel justified if necessary if I felt the person was doing serious damage to the other person and was defenseless or something. I would, in theory, feel justified in using force to stop him. So I'm willing to pass a law that authorizes a cop to do that because I'm willing to do it myself. My position is a politician, if they're going to pass a law saying we're going to give you a ticket for rolling a stop sign and take $50 from you, you come to my house, demand the $50, bring a gun.
I think it's interesting that you noted that the idea of like government or I don't think I mean obviously governmental systems aren't a fiction, but the idea of like blaming the government for things is a fiction in the sense that it's a false flag. It's you're basically blaming nothing. And I think around this area specifically, like especially in like the south and like with all the coal mines being shut down in this area, you hear so much that people blame Obama, and it's and to an extent, I guess he supports some policies that were causal to that. But what's not important, or what's more important in that is that they're looking for someone to take the moral agency, and they just have they use whoever, and since the president is assumed to have the highest authority, they use that as a sort of scapegoat.
Right.
But
And don't you think people are naturally inclined to do that?
oh yeah, that's my point. Yeah, they're
Yeah.
definitely inclined to do that because that's what they're picking up on. Is
Nature abhors
they
a vacuum.
No, I'm not even saying like that's what they're picking up on. I'm just saying like that's how they naturally are. Like
I'm
most
saying
most people are more than happy to defer their moral agency to the government. And
I don't.
for a
That's not what's
libertarian
happening.
for a libertarian society to work, people have to do the opposite, basically.
But you see, I view this as the opposite. That nature abhors a vacuum. That the people can tell something's wrong here. Right? Something's wrong. There's nobody responsible for this. There's nobody who's the moral agent that I can point to and say, this is the individual making this demand upon me, and with this justification. There's nobody I can say, sit down and explain yourself to me. And the reason people reach out and find somebody to blame, like Obama, is because that's not natural. That's what's not natural, is the inability to hold anybody accountable for actions that are taken by people.
yes, that's what's not natural. I want to respond to JC though about we've been trying to look to higher authorities. Well, I guess that's kind of it's like we're born into families, and most of us have to defer authority to whoever is like giving us the privilege to develop within their environment. So I think what you're saying is technically true, but I don't think there's any way to like avoid that.
Well, I think school is just, I don't know if it's, I think it's wrong
I
to say
think-
it's designed to do this, but functionally what it does is it teaches people it conditions people to expect to spend their whole day doing shit they don't want to do to get a reward of some sort at the end of the day from a central reward giver.
Yeah, I think that's actually the main goal of the school system anyway.
But the school system
It's
doesn't have a
conditioning.
goal. That's the thing. It's not a
No, I'm
goal.
saying like it's like it's model what is modeled after. It's basically to condition people to be subservient to authority.
Whose intention is that?
But I'm saying like I'm not saying it's an intention, but like that's the end result.
Yes, I agree with you there. I agree it's the end result. But I think that's why we have to be careful about how we talk about this stuff, right? When we say like, oh, that's the goal of the public school system. Well, who's over there scheming to get everybody to obey? Nobody, frankly. It's a vestigial tale from back when society was much more caste oriented and had a lot more hierarchy and stuff. When probably somebody did want to structure it to make people obey, and thought that was a perfectly reasonable thing to do because they were the enlightened upper classes and those peons didn't know any better anyway. Maybe at some point they did think that, but that's not what a teacher thinks now. They don't go into the profession thinking, "Aha, I'm going to make
Yeah, but I
I'm going to
think-
break the spirits of these children."
But you have to understand that you don't think policymakers don't think about this.
I
What do you think all these think tanks are for?
You're assuming a shared intention that doesn't exist. You're assuming that this think tank, they know they want something specific. We want to make sure that there are more people in America who are willing to do menial jobs obediently. So let's structure the school system by teaching them English, history, math, science, and what, Tommy? That makes no sense. What if they say, well, let's structure it by making them go to a central location and enjoy it. Well, there's a good reason why we have that model. It's because in the olden days, before we had the internet and stuff, and you couldn't have a teacher for just individual teacher for every kid. It was a compromise. It was a solution we had to use to organize teaching a community's children. You can imagine a farming community with a bunch of kids. And they all want their kids educated. They hire a teacher from the East Coast. She comes out and she teaches grades K through 12 in a one-room schoolhouse. That's where we have that system. It's not. There's no maliciousness to it. But the problem is, functionally, what it does is it teaches everybody to accustom themselves to spending all day fucking being a slave.
I'm not saying that the school system, when it first started, was created explicitly to control people and make them subservient. But I'm saying that over the course of the years, policymakers have seen the end result of what it does to people, and and psychologists as well. And then they get together in these think tanks and they come up with for other policies to.
So why aren't they obedient? Didn't they
go?
go through the schools? Why aren't these policymakers? Why didn't they turn out obedient slugs? They went through the same schools.
I think they did. Until they got through the structure, and now they possess like a authority over the structure, you know.
And suddenly they became, because of their position, they said they then think about humans differently. They say, well, they don't really know what they're doing. I need to do it for them. I need to make those decisions.
I think it's a bunch of STJs. They're like, well, I made through the structure. It worked for me. It should work for everyone else.
Right.
I got an idea though. Because we need some moral agency to the people doing laws, we should go back to the old style monarchs. And if our elected monarch isn't properly governing our society right, we should stab him to death like some old Roman shit. Or like some Jon Snow shit.
We get all 400 million Americans each get one stab.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't want to be last. You totally don't want to be last in that line, right? It's just a bloody pile of goo at that point.
No, we elect representatives from each state and 50 stabs.
Oh, okay. Only 50. That's fair. He might even survive that.
That way yeah, exactly. They still lose their political position, you know. Well, the 50th
no, if
person,
they survive the stabbing, they get to be king again.
Okay, let's do that. Yeah. Then they'll realize, as soon as they see people coming with knives, and they start changing their policies instantly because they realize the people are unhappy.
I mean, free bananas for everyone.
Let's reverse it. The people will coerce the government into doing shit that they want.
Right. Yeah. So I like the idea of instead of having impeachment, we have stab-peachment.
Elected representatives from each state individually get one stab.
Right, and I think that should be a rule for every government official.
That would never happen.
If you get an ethics violation, you get stab-peached, and then if you survive it, you can run for office again.
As soon as those officials get elected, they're going to change the law.
Well, that's true, probably. They probably don't like the stab-peaching law.
That's a good point, homie. That's a good point.
Broadcast.
No, or they'll just
then the people will be unhappy with their law they're passing, and here come the knives.
Well, you see, Frenzy has a good idea. He sees this as a way to pad the treasury. We'll broadcast it on Talking with Fan People, and we will have branded knife sponsors. Is what he indicates there. He didn't indicate that we'd have it here, but I like the idea of having different knife companies in competition with each other, and then afterwards we could have a roundtable discussion about which knife had the best stabbiness. That's usually the metric upon which knife quality is adjudicated. Is that a stabbiness of 9.8? You're gonna want to buy this knife.
That was a fun discussion.
Yeah, I would also say that as long as I'm not within the power structure, I'm a libertarian. But I feel like once I join the power structure, though, I might have to
Keep that TE.
disregard all my principles.
You can't keep that TE from taking dominant.
Citizens of America, I have gone through all the doubting of my libertarian principles. I have stomped upon that pile of leaves a lot of times. And I promise you, when I become president of the United States, I'm vetoing all kinds of shit. Remember, president doesn't pass laws or doesn't get to write laws. We just get to veto stuff. I'm a president now. Pretty soon, eventually, someday, maybe, probably, almost for sure. Thanks for watching Talking with Famous People.